The Alabama Crimson Tide went 13-2 last year, losing to Texas A&M in the regular season and, of course, Georgia in the national title game. They did beat Georgia in the SEC title game, so they won the SEC, won their first-round playoff game against Cincinnati, first ever Group of 5 team to make it to the playoffs, and lost to Georgia in the national title game 33-18. Bryce Young's back on the offensive side of the ball. Will Anderson is back on the defensive side of the ball. Two of the best players in all of college football. In fact, Alabama might have the best offensive player in Bryce Young, of course, won the Heisman last year, and the best defensive player, Will Anderson. They might have the best two players offensively and defensively in all of college football, and are just loaded at talent, really at every single position across the board. They also brought in some key transfers during the offseason to try to help them get back to the national title game. Can they do it? I don't know. We're going to take a look at their schedule in this video here today and try to figure that out. Now, this is not a prediction video. Every year, really, around this time, I do a whole series of schedule preview videos where I just kind of go through a team's schedule, try to kind of compare it a little bit to last year's schedule. Is it harder? Is it easier? What about the non-con games, or conference games? Which ones are on the road? Which ones might be tricky, trap games, rivalry games? Where's the bye week? Does it fall at a good spot? Are there any points of the schedule where maybe you play 2 or 3 difficult games in a row, which sometimes can be tricky? Back-to-back road games sometimes can be a problem. Just kind of trying to get a feel of some of these schedules. Like I said, I've done a whole series of these. There's a playlist. You can click on it and take a look at all the teams I've done. I think I've done, this might be about the 10th one or so, I think, that I've done. But here we go. Let's take a look at the schedule. Of course, they've got their spring game coming up Saturday, 6 days from today, the Golden Flakes A-Day game. That's amazing. Is that where they do the running of the Gumps, or is that in the summer? Not sure. Anyway, let's just take a look at the regular season schedule here. Okay, they opened things up at home this year against Utah State. I believe last year they played Miami in week 1. Now, they still have a big non-con game this year. It just comes in week 2 at Texas. But Alabama will be a huge favorite in that Utah State game. Should win, no problem. Week 2 at Texas, one of the biggest non-con games of the season. Really, you have Ohio State, Notre Dame, Georgia, Oregon, Florida and Utah, Florida State, LSU. I mean, you got a bunch of them, Southern Cal and Notre Dame. You have a bunch of big non-con games, just like you do every single year. This is a game we don't get to see very often, though. This is one I think that people are excited about. And I like this in particular because it's a home-and-home series. I feel like I mention this all the time. But the reason is because it's true. I love college football games that are played on college campuses. I'm not a big fan of a lot of these neutral site games that are popping up now. So when you have teams like Alabama and Texas who are willing to schedule home and homes, to me, that's what college football is all about. This will be a big game. I mean, people expect Alabama to win. I get it that people expect Alabama to win every single week. Texas thinks they have a shot in this game, though. They get them at home. I know Texas was down last year, but eventually, it seems like, anyway, Texas is bound to have a breakout season. Could it be this year? Of course, Steve Sarkisian there, former Saban assistant, so you've got that whole storyline. Up until last year, Saban had never lost to a former assistant, and, of course, both his losses last year were to former assistants, Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M, Kirby Smart at Georgia. But this will be a great game at Texas, week 2, September 10th. Then another non-con game against Louisiana Monroe. Again, a game in which Alabama should be a significant favorite. And then the conference schedule starts with a home game against Vandy. This is Alabama's rotating opponent from the SEC East for this year. Alabama plays Tennessee from the East every single year, and then a second opponent that rotates year after year. They played Georgia in the regular season a couple of years ago. Who'd they play last year in the regular season? Florida? I believe it was Florida they played last year in the regular season. This year they draw Vandy from the East, again, at home. First conference road game comes the following week, October 1st, when they go on the road to take on Sam Pittman in Arkansas. Arkansas is a good story, but Alabama's just got way more talent. Now, Arkansas would love nothing more than to get a big win like this at home for their fans, Sam Pittman and company there. Hard to imagine Arkansas being able to pull this one off, but it's an SEC road game. The crowd will be fired up, I'm sure. We'll see how it goes. Alabama's first SEC road game, October 1st, on the road in Fayetteville against the Razorbacks. Then they come back home for a revenge game from last year. It was a great game last year, the loss at Texas A&M. Texas A&M, of course, with a backup quarterback, Calzada, right? Able to hang on and beat Alabama at home. Now, Alabama made some critical mistakes in that game, some very uncharacteristic mistakes in that game. But doesn't matter. All that matters is the final score, and Texas A&M did get the win over Alabama last year. So this is a revenge game for Alabama. They get them at home again. Just like with every game on their schedule, Alabama's going to be a favorite. Texas A&M had, the greatest recruiting class in history? Is that what they're telling us about this last recruiting class? Not really sure how much that's going to help Texas A&M this year. I mean, Texas A&M recruits pretty well almost every single year, so I'm not sure how many of those true freshmen will be making an impact this year, but Texas A&M, talent-wise anyway, is getting better. We'll see if that translates to wins on the field. They did beat Alabama last year, but still went on to lose 4 games, I believe it was, in the regular season. And they got to travel to Bryant-Denny Stadium here and take on Alabama, trying to beat them for the second year in a row. And then a rivalry game the following week, the third Saturday in October, they call this. They go on the road to take on Hendon Hooker, Josh Heupel, and the Tennessee Vols. Tennessee gave Alabama a pretty good game last year for about 2.5 quarters before Alabama pulled away in the end. Tennessee's defense was sort of the issue there, not just in the Alabama game, but just kind of in general. Tennessee's offense okay last year under Josh Heupel. I don't mean okay in a bad way. I meant the offense was fine. The defense was the issue, is what I mean. Mainly because of the style of play I think that Tennessee is running right now offensively. Your defense can get wore out. We saw that last year with Tennessee. But this is a big game every single year. It's been forever since Tennessee has won this game. Tennessee has a lot of hopes and expectations, their fans as well, about this upcoming season. I'm not sure Tennessee is in a position yet where they could knock off an Alabama or a Georgia. They may be able to beat Florida this year, though, who they get at home, but not sure if they can get a win here. It is a home game, one of the biggest stadiums, not just in the SEC, but in America. The crowd will be nuts, at least in the first half or the first quarter. And the longer that game goes on, where Tennessee feels like they have a chance to win, the more and more that crowd is going to become a factor in that game. But we'll see. Alabama at Tennessee, October 15th. October 22nd, you come back home, take on Mississippi State. Again, you'll be a significant favorite there. Some people are high on Mississippi State for this upcoming season, and I'll admit I haven't looked into Mississippi State a whole lot yet. But as of right now, I am not very high on Mississippi State. Maybe I'll change my mind when I start digging into it a little bit more to do the prediction videos that I do starting in June. But I would assume this is a game Alabama is going to win. It's hard for me to imagine Nick Saban losing to Mike Leach for whatever reason. Then you get your bye week before the big game at LSU. Brian Kelly's first crack at Alabama here comes at home for LSU. Alabama has dominated this series of late, although LSU does have a few wins over the last few years. We'll see if they can get another one here. But again, even though it's on the road, I think Alabama will be a significant favorite. Now, this is pretty tough here. Back-to-back road games coming off of that bye week at LSU, and then you turn around and, at Ole Miss, of course, Lane Kiffin, a tricky offense, or at least usually a pretty good offense. They lost some talent off of last year's 10-win team, but they bring in some talent through the transfer portal as well. I don't think Ole Miss is just going to fall off the face of the earth. Now, can they win 10 games in a row, 2 seasons in a row? That I doubt, and it's hard for me to imagine them beating Alabama this year. If you remember last year, a lot of people, myself included, thought Ole Miss would have a shot against Alabama, and Alabama just jumped all over them early in that game. I believe they were up 28-0 was it halftime or early in the third quarter, and just kind of cruised to something was like a 35-21 win. They just kind of cruise controlled in the second half of that game. After those 2 back-to-back road games, you come back home for 2 games. The first one's a non-con game against Austin Peay, the Governors, on November 19th. Again, Alabama will win by 100 or will be favored by 100. And then, of course, the last game of the season, just like it is every year, the Iron Bowl, this time in Alabama. One of the best games of the year last year's Iron Bowl, right? And I mean, not if you like scoring. There wasn't a whole lot of scoring. Auburn was playing its backup quarterback, who was injured and can barely move. Bryce Young had probably the worst game of his career. until 1 minute to go in the fourth quarter. Alabama was trailing. Bryce Young had the ball around his own 5-yard line, and he led basically a game-tying drive in the last minute down the field to send that game to overtime, and Alabama went on to win that game in overtime, and the rest was history. But it was a great game. It's almost always a good game. This is one of those games in college football where you don't have to be an Alabama fan, you don't have to be an Auburn fan, you don't even have to be a fan of anybody in the SEC. This is one of 4 or 5 games in all of college football that attracts fans coast to coast. I mean, Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, Oklahoma. There's a few I don't want to start naming them, and then I'll forget one, and somebody will get mad. But there it is. That's Alabama's schedule. SEC championship game would be the following Saturday, December 3rd. Most people expect Alabama to be there again. I do as well. We'll see. You can let me know down below what you think Alabama's record might be this coming year. Again, this is not a prediction video. I do an entire series of prediction videos, but I don't start those until June. I just like to take a look at a lot of these schedules. It helps me start to kind of dive into these teams for the upcoming season. All right, really appreciate you guys watching. Have a good morning.